The millionaire's autistic son hadn't spoken a word for years. He lived locked in his own silence until the day the new nanny knelt before him. No techniques, no fear. She simply reached out her hand, and for the first time, the boy decided to trust. But what she didn't expect was that the millionaire, upon seeing the scene, would stop at the door, stand still for long seconds, and then do something that would leave the nanny completely speechless. The fine, persistent drizzle falling over New York City that November afternoon was a grey blur on the armored glass of the sedan. Inside, Richard Davenport tracked the stock market on his tablet, the green and red numbers dancing like a silent reflection of the controlled chaos he so prized. Outside, Wall Street was a river of metal and horns, a clogged artery in the nation's financial heart, where his vast fortune multiplied each second in the form of stocks and complex derivatives. He was a man who measured time in profit, and this traffic jam was an irritating liability on his daily spreadsheet. His phone rang, the smooth, custom tone he'd set for internal calls from his penthouse. It was Sophia, the housekeeper, her voice heavy with a resignation he knew well. "Mr. Davenport, the new nanny has arrived, a little early." He sighed, the sound almost inaudible. The news landed with the weight of hopelessness. The recommendation had come from a nurse at the physical therapy clinic, an attempt to find someone who wouldn't be intimidated by his son, Leo's silence. They all arrived with promises, rehearsed speeches about patience and innovative methods. They all left, defeated by the wall of quiet the boy had built around himself. He hung up as the car finally began to move, gliding smoothly into the subterranean garage of the building, a fortress of glass and concrete overlooking Central Park. Stepping out of the private elevator that opened directly into his living room, he expected to find silence, a dense silence, cold as the travertine marble covering the floor. But what greeted him was different. It was a low sound, a melody plucked from memory, an old Appalachian folk song that smelled of damp earth and country mornings. A universe away from this aseptic environment. The tune came from the playroom, a room that looked more like a showroom for expensive, untouched pedagogical toys. Richard walked slowly, his Italian loafers making no sound on the Persian rug, and then he stopped, frozen in the doorway. The scene before him defied every law of his world. The nanny, a woman with simple features and hair tied in a loose bun, was kneeling on the soft carpet, and his son, Leo, in his motorized wheelchair, had his arm outstretched, his small hand hovering millimeters from her palm. She sang softly, her eyes fixed on his, and as the melody unfolded, Leo's hesitant fingers finally touched her skin, a touch, a simple, monumental touch. The air in the room didn't smell of cleaning products, but of freshly brewed coffee, an aroma that transported him to a childhood he barely remembered. The city roared outside, a sleeping monster. But in here, time had stopped. Richard felt a contraction in his chest, a muscle he hadn't used in years. He took a step forward, the instinct to control, to understand, to catalogue the scene taking over. The discreet squeak of his shoe on the floor was enough. Leo stiffened immediately, his hand retracting like a startled animal. The spell broken. The silence returned, this time sharp, heavy with disappointment. The nanny, without standing up, raised her eyes to him. There was no fear in her gaze, nor the subservience he expected from his staff. There was only a deep calm, a quiet authority that disarmed him. She didn't smile, didn't apologize, didn't rush to greet him. She just made a request, her voice gentle but firm, cutting through the tension. "Stay," she said, "but don't speak." For the first time in his adult life, a man accustomed to giving orders that could shake the stock market and define the future of major corporations, obeyed one. He stayed, and in silence, he felt the weight of his own presence like that of an intruder in his own home. Richard remained there, a statue in an expensive suit and restrained emotions, while the woman, who he later learned was named Anna, resumed her song in a whisper. She didn't look at him again, dedicating all her attention to the boy, who slowly relaxed his tense body. The small hand, once withdrawn, opened again on his lap. There was no new touch, but the intention was enough. For Richard, a man who built a fortune analyzing charts and predicting market movements, that interaction was an indecipherable code. He felt like a foreigner in his own home, observing a dialect he didn't understand but whose meaning was undeniably powerful. He, who controlled a fortune of millions and moved markets with a simple voice command, was powerless before that scene. He backed away in silence, his heart beating out of sync, and took refuge in his office, the smoked glass door closing him off with the hum of his servers and the panoramic view of the city that seemed to mock his wealth. This woman wasn't an asset he could simply acquire. She was a variable he couldn't calculate. And that scared him more than any sudden market crash. In the 2 weeks that followed, the apartment, once governed by a rigid and silent routine, began to breathe in a new rhythm, punctuated by rituals born from Anna's observation. Small, everyday miracles. At breakfast, a small blue plastic cup, always the same one, was placed next to Leo's plate. A point of consistency in a sensorially chaotic world. In the hallway leading to the bedroom, a path of colored felt squares was taped to the marble floor, turning the wheelchair's journey into a tactile one. Yellow was to speed up a little. Red was to stop and take a deep breath. And in the late afternoon, invariably, Anna would take Leo out onto the immense glass-enclosed balcony. There, sitting side by side, they would wait for the sun to set, and the boy, who always flinched at the city's noises, seemed to relax to the distant, melancholic jingle of an ice cream truck echoing up from the park. Richard, for his part, began to sabotage his own schedule. Meetings were postponed, international conferences delegated. He started coming home earlier, under the pretext of needing quiet to analyze the crypto market. But the truth was, he would stay in his office, the door ajar, just to observe. He bought books on child development and sensory integration, trying to find in pages and theories the logic behind the magic unfolding just a few feet away. The victories, previously non-existent, began to accumulate like small dividends of hope. One Saturday, during a speech therapy session, Leo, who had never made a voluntary sound, mimicked one of the notes of the country song Anna sang. The therapist called Richard, her voice choked with an emotion he didn't know how to process. The following Monday, while Anna showed him the texture of a leaf she'd brought from the park, Leo held her hand completely, his fingers intertwining with hers, with a confidence that made the air leave his father's lungs as he watched from afar. And on Tuesday, the event that cracked his armor. At the end of the day, as Anna was saying goodbye, a tiny sound, almost a breath, escaped Leo's lips. A syllable. The first syllable of her name, A. Richard, hiding behind the kitchen door, had to lean on the granite countertop to keep from collapsing. On Wednesday, he summoned her to his office. He was determined to ensure she didn't leave. He slid an envelope across the mahogany desk. "Your salary will be tripled, and there's a retention bonus, a considerable sum, if you sign a 2-year contract." Anna opened the envelope, looked at the numbers without expression, and pushed it back. "I don't need this, Mr. Davenport." He frowned, confused. "Then what do you want?" She faced him, with the same unshakable calm from the first day. "I want the freedom to continue my work, without spreadsheets, without reports, without interference." He nodded, an almost imperceptible gesture. And as he agreed to cede control, a cold panic washed over him. The freedom Anna asked for wasn't contained within the apartment walls. She began to stretch the limits of Leo's world, 1 inch at a time, using the city itself as a therapeutic tool. The first expedition was to the Union Square Green Market, a place Richard considered a sensory nightmare. He hesitated, calculating the risks as one would a high-risk investment, but he relented, sending a plainclothes security guard to follow them at a discreet distance. Amid the chaos of colors and voices, Anna didn't buy anything to eat. Instead, she guided Leo's hand over the textures of the fruit, the wrinkled skin of a passion fruit, the smooth, taut peel of a persimmon, the velvety surface of a peach. She named each sensation, transforming what would have been an overload of stimuli into a lesson of discovery. On a Sunday morning, on a stretch of Broadway, closed for a street fair, amid cyclists and street performers, she found a pair of noise-reducing headphones on sale at a vendor's stall. They cost a tiny fraction of what Richard spent on a single business lunch, but for Leo, they were worth gold. With them, the roar of the city became a tolerable hum. And in Greenwich Village, upon finding a group playing folk music in a square, Anna didn't hesitate. She asked the guitarist for permission and recorded a snippet of the song on her phone, a sonic treasure to use during the boys' moments of greatest agitation. Each of these small acts of courage yielded emotional dividends at home. Leo began to tolerate more time outside his room, sometimes even staying in the living room while the television was on at a low volume. Sophia, the housekeeper, who had at first watched Anna with a protective suspicion, was now her greatest ally. When she saw Leo smile, hearing the recording of the folk song, she would hurry to the kitchen to bake chocolate chip cookies, the scent of cinnamon and affection filling the apartment. The biggest change, however, occurred in Richard. One Tuesday morning, moved by an impulse he didn't understand, he woke Leo before sunrise. In silence, he took him to the park. For the first time in years, father and son watched together as the ducks dove into the misty pond, the city still asleep in the background. Richard said nothing, just felt the weight of his son's head resting on his shoulder, a form of communication more valuable than any performance report from his funds. These victories, however, began to attract unwanted attention, demanding a price that couldn't be paid with money. Beatrice, his executive assistant, a ruthless woman whose loyalty was to the business empire Richard had built, viewed this new development with skepticism. For her, the boss's life had to be shielded, free of emotional variables that could affect his performance. The nanny was a dangerous variable. Beatrice's distrust materialized into action. Subtly, she began to sow doubt. "Don't you think it's risky to expose Leo like this? The family's image is a valuable asset," she told Richard, with the coolness of someone discussing cryptocurrency fluctuations. She distorted the incident with the recording in Greenwich Village, insinuating to other staff members that the nanny might be gathering material for future exposure. The poison found an echo in the building. Mrs. Astor, the co-op board president and an influential socialite, commented in the elevator, loud enough for Richard to hear as he entered. "Such a simple girl. Does she really have the training for such a responsibility? Protecting an estate like this requires qualifications." The social pressure tightened like a noose, threatening to suffocate the fragile bridge Anna was building. Richard found himself in the center of a silent storm, pressed on one side by Beatrice's corporate logic and the prejudice of his social class, and on the other by the undeniable and miraculous progress of his son. Doubt, his old companion, began to knock on his door again. He was in his office at the end of an exhausting day when Beatrice entered unannounced. Her face wore an expression of false concern. She slid a black folder across the glass desk. "Mr. Davenport, as a matter of protocol and security, I thought it prudent to do a more thorough background check on Anna. I think you'll want to see this." The black folder on the mahogany desk seemed like a black hole, sucking all the light and hope from the room. Richard opened it with the reluctance of someone turning over a bad card in a high-stakes game. Inside, there was nothing criminal, nothing scandalous. There was only Anna's life, dissected into cold, bureaucratic bullet points. Born in a tiny town in rural Kentucky, father deceased when she was 16, responsible for raising her 3 younger siblings. high school diploma, no college degree, no specialization courses. For Beatrice, this was irrefutable proof of her inadequacy. She has no formal qualifications, Mr. Davenport. She's an ordinary person. In risk management terms, she's a liability, not an asset. The exposure she creates could eventually affect your business, your net worth. Richard closed the folder with a sharp click. Beatrice's logic was the same one he applied to his investments, but for the first time, it felt empty, inhumane. Thank you, Beatrice. You may go. The assistant left, leaving a trail of poisonous doubt behind her. He, who had built his fortune on data and analysis, now found himself torn between the reality his eyes witnessed and the risk his mind calculated. The following Saturday, Anna suggested a trip to the mall, a more controlled environment, with air conditioning. We can go at an off-peak time, just to get him used to the lights and sounds gradually. Richard agreed, his heart tight. It was a test, for Leo and for himself. The beginning was surprisingly calm. With his noise-reducing headphones, Leo observed the shop windows with a serene curiosity, Anna's hand always nearby, a safe harbor. They stopped for ice cream, and the boy even tried a small spoonful of vanilla, without his usual aversion. Richard felt a wave of optimism, a sensation so rare it almost scared him. It was then that a store's alarm, shrill and merciless, went off just a few feet away. The sound tore through the air, and Leo's fragile bubble of calm. The boy shrank in his chair, his hands clamped over his ears, his body trembling violently. A low moan, a sound of pure panic, escaped his throat. Richard froze. All his money, all his wealth, all his assets accumulated in gold and stocks seemed like useless dust at that moment. He was a billionaire, unable to buy a moment of peace for his own son. But Anna didn't freeze. With a speed and calm that defied the situation, she pulled a light blue blanket from her bag. The fabric, he noticed, had a faint scent of chamomile. She knelt in front of Leo, ignoring the curious stares of the few passers-by, and wrapped him in the blanket, creating a small cocoon of safety. She began humming the folk melody, her voice a steady, reassuring whisper against the sound of the still blaring alarm. Gradually, the boy's trembling subsided. He nestled into the scented fabric, his face hidden in Anna's shoulder. The crisis had passed. A few yards away, Mrs. Astor, the board president, emerging from a designer boutique, watched the scene with a look of disapproval, her phone discreetly raised. For her, the episode wasn't an act of care, but a spectacle of a lack of control. That night, Richard couldn't work. The image of his son in a panic and Anna's serene competence replayed in his mind. Gratitude and fear waged a battle within him. He needed her. He needed that calm, that instinct. But he also needed to protect himself. Protect his son. Protect his world from the unpredictability she represented. He called her to his office, the sanctuary where no one, since his wife's departure, had ever entered. He held out a small bronze key. This is the key to the office. Feel free to choose any books or music you need for Leo. Anna was speechless, her eyes shining with a silent gratitude. Then he pushed a second object across the desk, a bound document. But I need you to sign this. It's an expanded non-disclosure agreement, more rigorous. The light in Anna's eyes faded, replaced by a shadow of disappointment. She picked up the document, its synthetic leather cover cold to the touch, a stark contrast to the warmth of the bronze key she still held. The pages were filled with clauses, numbered paragraphs, and legal jargon designed to intimidate. It spoke of perpetual secrecy, of multi-million-dollar penalties for any breach of trust, of restrictions that went far beyond her role as a caregiver. It was a contract that sought not just to protect Leo, but to control every aspect of her own life. She looked at Richard, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of hurt in her usually serene gaze. He wanted to trust her, but in handcuffs. He wanted the miracle, but inside a bank vault. The gratitude he felt was tied to fear, and the currency of exchange was her freedom. "I can't sign this right now, Mr. Davenport," she said, her voice low but firm. "I need to read it carefully, to understand what you're asking of me." Her refusal, polite but unequivocal, was like a splash of cold water. No one in his corporate universe had ever dared to question a contract he presented. His lawyers were the best, his offers non-negotiable. The tension in the room was palpable. Richard felt the blood rush to his face, a mixture of irritation and shame. He had miscalculated, acted on an impulse of control that now revealed itself as a strategic, and worse, a human error. He looked at the document on the table, at the key in her hand, and recognized his own excess. He had offered a bridge, and then demanded an impassable toll. That contract wasn't about protecting Leo, it was about protecting himself from the vulnerability that the boy, and now Anna, forced him to feel. In a gesture that surprised them both, he took the document, walked to the small gas fireplace in the corner of the office, and with a click, ignited the flame. The bluish fire sprang to life. Without hesitation, he pushed the contract into the flames. The edges of the paper blackened, then curled, and the fire consumed the words, turning the clauses of mistrust into ash. Anna watched the scene, her lips parted, her heart pounding. That impulsive act, that symbolic burning of his own armor, opened a crack in the wall he had built around himself. And through that crack, a new possibility of connection, a fragile bridge, began to form. The next day, news of Leo's meltdown at the mall was already circulating in the building's resident text group, fueled by Mrs. Astor's distorted narrative. "A complete scandal," she wrote. "The nanny was utterly unprepared. The boy was screaming. Such an unnecessary exposure." Richard felt the social pressure mount. But the memory of the burning contract kept him from retreating. He decided to face the situation head-on. He asked Anna to accompany him to a meeting with Leo's speech therapist and physical therapist. For the first time, he didn't go as the financier of the treatment, the man whose capital provided access to the best specialists. He went as a father. He sat next to Anna, listening intently as she described, with admirable simplicity and precision, the small routines she had created. She spoke of the colored felt squares, the blue cup, the scent of the chamomile blanket. The speech therapist, an experienced woman, listened and took notes, a discreet smile on her face. At the end, she looked at Richard. "Mr. Davenport, what Anna is doing is called affection and routine-based sensory integration. It's state-of-the-art. Many families with vast financial resources pay fortunes for therapies that try to artificially replicate what she is building intuitively. The bond is the greatest asset your son can have." The word asset, used in such a different context, resonated in his mind. He left the clinic feeling both validated and humbled. Validated for having the best possible help for his son, humbled for having almost destroyed it all out of fear. As they walked in silence back to the car, he stopped. "Anna," he said, his voice hoarse, I'm sorry about the contract." She just nodded, but her eyes said that forgiveness was possible. That same afternoon, Beatrice entered his office with the urgency of someone announcing a great victory. "I got it. A spot in the best clinic in Switzerland. Revolutionary methods, data, charts, everything you like. They use brain mapping technology to create personalized stimuli. The therapeutic return on investment is extremely high." She placed the glossy brochure on his desk. The photos showed smiling children in sterile, high-tech environments. The promise was of fast, measurable results, a solution he could buy, a cure that wouldn't require him to feel vulnerable. Richard looked at the brochure, the sheen of the coated paper reflecting the cold light of the room. It was the perfect exit, the logical solution. It was everything he had always sought, and for the first time, he didn't want it. The Swiss clinic's proposal was seductive, a siren song for the man Richard used to be: data, charts, efficiency, measurable results. It was a language he understood, an investment with the promise of a high return. Beatrice, sensing his hesitation, pressed on with the skill of an experienced negotiator. Mr. Davenport, think of it as an investment in Leo's future. The most important capital he has is his well-being. This clinic offers the very best, an optimization of his potential. Anna did a good initial job, but now it's time to scale up, to bring in professionals with an international pedigree. The phrase, scale up, hit him like a punch. He wasn't managing a startup. He was raising his son. The idea of sending Leo to an unknown environment, far from the only person who had managed to break through his silence, suddenly seemed absurd, cruel. He looked at Beatrice, the woman who for years had been his right hand, the guardian of his empire, and saw in her a reflection of his own past, a man who believed that everything, even affection, could be outsourced and optimized. "I'll think about it, Beatrice. Leave the documents with me," he said, his neutral voice hiding the storm inside. When he told Anna about the clinic, he tried to do it as clinically as possible, presenting the proposal as an opportunity to be evaluated. But she wasn't one of his executives. She didn't see charts. She saw the possibility of a devastating rupture. The pain on her face was immediate and profound, a wound opened by the mistrust he was once again showing. It wasn't about the money, the fortune, or the opportunity to go to Europe. It was about the bond. It was about the blue cup, the felt path, the scent of chamomile. It was about the whispered "A" that was worth more than all the gold stored in Swiss vaults. "If you think it's what's best for him," she said. Her voice choked, unable to finish the sentence. She didn't argue, didn't fight. She simply retreated into a silent sadness. That night, for the first time in weeks, Leo didn't want to go to the balcony to watch the sunset. He stayed in his room, agitated, as if he could feel the fissure that had opened between the adults who cared for him. The silence, which had become lighter and filled with little melodies, once again grew heavy, oppressive. Anna began to pack her few belongings into a small backpack, not with anger, but with the resignation of someone who has lost much in life and has learned not to fight against tides she cannot control. Richard watched her from a distance, his heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. He was about to make the same mistake he always made, choosing control over connection, the security of numbers over the uncertainty of affection. He approached Leo's room, drawn by a low sound. The boy was in his chair, facing the door, holding one of the colored felt squares, the yellow one. He was looking at Anna, who had her back to him, folding a t-shirt, and then the sound came, clearer, louder than any he had ever made. A whole word, articulated with a monumental effort, a word that was both a name and a plea. Stay. The word hung in the air, charged with the weight of a universe of unspoken feelings. Anna turned, her eyes flooding with tears. Richard felt the floor disappear from beneath his feet. That single word from his son demolished all his defenses, all his charts, all his certainties. He saw himself naked, disarmed. A father who had almost traded his most precious treasure for a shiny but empty promise. He walked into the room, the movement causing them both to look at him. He approached Anna, his gaze pleading. "Don't go," he whispered. Then he picked up the phone and called Beatrice. Beatrice cancelled the appointment with the Swiss clinic. There was a shocked silence on the other end of the line. "But, sir, the spot, the costs." He cut her off, his voice firmer than ever. "Cancel it and schedule a meeting with Leo's speech therapist for tomorrow. I want her to help us put together a home-based evaluation plan with clear metrics, noise tolerance, length of eye contact, number of syllables. We're going to give ourselves a deadline, 4 weeks. He hung up and turned to Anna, who was looking at him with a mixture of surprise and hope. But with conditions, he said, his voice still trembling. I want to participate in everything. I want to learn the song, the order of the felt squares, the right scent for the blanket. I want you to teach me. Anna didn't answer with words. She just nodded, a tearful smile spreading across her face. And, for the first time, she extended her hand, not to the boy, but to the father. And he took it. The effort, once a passive observation, now smelled of sweat and tasted of frustration. Richard's early mornings, previously dedicated to tracking the closing of the Asian markets, turned into clumsy, acoustic guitar lessons. His fingers, accustomed to the agility of typing multi-million-dollar stock orders, were stiff and slow on the strings. He messed up the melody of the folk song again and again, and the out-of-tune sound he produced was a constant reminder of his ineptitude in this new universe. The spreadsheets on his tablet changed. The columns that once displayed cryptocurrency quotes, dividends, and interest from his funds now listed calming scents, tolerable sounds, and textures Leo accepted touching. Anna was the patient teacher, correcting his hand position on the guitar neck, explaining the logic behind the order of the colored felt squares, guiding him through a territory where intuition was worth more than any accumulated capital. In those sessions, the multi-billionaire was just a student, and this vulnerability, though frightening, began to feel like a relief, a voluntary disarmament that brought him closer to his son in a way no inheritance ever could. However, the old structure of his power had not been completely dismantled. Beatrice, removed from decisions about Leo but still his chief of staff, watched the transformation with alarm. To her, her boss's vulnerability was a risk to the business, a distraction that could prove costly. Wounded by the cancellation of her Swiss plan, she acted with the precision of someone executing a hostile takeover. She conducted, on her own, a deeper investigation, not into Anna's present, but her past. And she found what she considered the definitive proof of the charade. She waited for the right moment, when Richard was exhausted after a sleepless night, trying to calm Leo from a nightmare. She entered the office with an innocuous-looking folder. Mr. Davenport, just one last formality, a security check the legal team insisted on. We found something you need to know. She presented him with documents showing that, years ago, Anna's family had received a substantial financial donation from a local politician, a man whose reputation was questionable at best. The money appeared in public records as an emergency relief grant, but the amount was too high not to raise suspicion. Richard felt a cold knot in his stomach. The old instinct, the risk analyst within him, awoke. Beatrice's narrative was compelling. A young woman from a poor family, accustomed to receiving handouts, who might see him and his wealth as a lifelong opportunity. Doubt, that slow poison, began to seep back into his veins. He called Anna to the office. He tried to be impartial, clinical. He placed the papers on the desk. Anna, I need you to explain this. It wasn't an accusation, but the tone was that of an auditor questioning a balance sheet. Anna's eyes fell on the documents, and all the color drained from her face. She didn't look at the papers, she looked at him, and what she saw in his eyes broke her. It wasn't anger that hurt her, it was the doubt. The fragile bridge of trust they had built crumbled in an instant. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was a thread of steel. That money, she said, was to buy an iron lung for my younger brother, who had polio. That politician was the only one in town with the power to get the equipment in time. And the price he charged was taking pictures with my family, as if it were an act of charity. I humbled myself, Mr. Davenport. I smiled for the cameras while my brother struggled to breathe so that he could live. She paused, the silence sharp. I thought you were starting to see me, but you still only see numbers." She turned, walked to the door, and opened it. "I can't heal Leo if his father is sick too." And then she left, leaving him alone with the ashes of his mistrust. The door closed with a soft click, but to Richard, it sounded like the thud of a vault door locking, leaving him on the outside. Anna's words, "If his father is sick too," echoed in the silent room, a precise and devastating diagnosis of an illness no amount of money could cure. He stood there, paralyzed, the papers with her humiliating story spread across the desk like evidence of his own failure. For a week, the apartment became a desert. He sent Sophia away, insisting he could handle everything himself, an act of penance. It was a week of silent chaos. The food was wrong, the music at the wrong volume, the routine a pale shadow of the choreography of care Anna had conducted with mastery. Everything he tried to do felt like a cheap imitation, devoid of the soul that made the magic happen. Frustration ate at him. He, a man who orchestrated multi-million-dollar mergers and managed a complex portfolio of assets and liabilities, was incapable of following a seemingly simple script. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. Alone with Leo in the hallway, he tried to replicate the colored path with the felt squares. He had watched Anna dozens of times, but now, with the pieces in his hand, he realized he had never truly seen. He taped the colors to the marble floor in what seemed a logical order, but when he placed Leo at the beginning of the path, the boy refused to move his chair. He grew tense, his fists clenched, a low hum of distress coming from his lips. Richard checked everything, the tire pressure on the chair, the room temperature, the external noises, nothing. It was then that, in desperation, he remembered a photo he had taken on his phone weeks earlier, wanting to show the method to the speech therapist. He opened the image, and the mistake jumped out at him. He had reversed the order of the blue and green, a detail, an insignificant detail to him. But for Leo's sensory world, it was like swapping the foundation of a building. With trembling hands, he corrected the colors, and as if a key had been turned in the right lock, Leo instantly relaxed and moved his chair over the first felt square. That night, exhausted and defeated, Richard picked up the guitar. He sat on the floor next to Leo's chair and tried to play the country melody. The sound that came out was scratchy, out of tune, a torture to the ears. He was about to give up, feeling shame burn his face, when something happened. Leo, who had been quiet, rested his head on his shoulder. A simple, hesitant gesture, but one that carried the weight of unconditional acceptance. Richard stopped playing, his heart pounding in his throat. He just sat there, feeling the light weight of his son's head, the smell of the chamomile baby shampoo he had used in his bath. And in silence, he cried. He cried for his arrogance, for his stupidity, for his loneliness. He finally understood. The method was not a cold technique that could be bought or replicated. It was a bond. It was the patience to learn the right order of the colors. It was the courage to sing out of tune. It was love. On Saturday, the rain returned to the city, fine and melancholic. Sophia, consumed by guilt for having doubted Anna, called him Mr. Davenport. "I know where she is." She explained that Anna had told her that to supplement her family's income, she sold homemade cakes every Saturday morning at the Port Authority bus terminal. Richard didn't hesitate. He drove through the grey city, the man from Wall Street heading towards the pulsating chaos of Midtown. When he arrived, he saw her under the awning of a makeshift stall, her face serene despite the drizzle, offering a slice of cornbread cake to a bus driver. She was in her element, dignified and strong. And he was the intruder, the sick man seeking a cure. He parked the luxury car a respectful distance away, the vehicle looking like an anomaly in that environment of grey concrete and hurried humanity. He watched her for several minutes, a figure of calm amidst the constant flow of people and buses. She didn't look sad or defeated. There was a resilience in her gestures, in the way she smiled at customers and arranged the cakes in the improvised display. It was the same dignity she carried when crossing his marble living room. Richard felt a lump in his throat. He had tried to frame her within his world of wealth and power, without realizing that her universe, built on foundations of necessity and affection, was infinitely more solid. He got out of the car, his expensive suit and Italian shoes drawing curious glances. The fine drizzle dampened his shoulders as he walked towards her. Anna saw him approach, and her face showed no surprise, only a quiet expectation. She finished serving a customer before turning to him, drying her hands on a clean dish towel. The noise of the engines and braking buses created a loud soundtrack around them, but in the small space under the awning an intimate silence settled. "Your cornbread cake looks good," he said, his voice sounding inadequate. Small. It was a stupid start, and he knew it. She gave a slight smile, a gesture that didn't reach her eyes. "My grandmother taught me the recipe." Richard took a deep breath, abandoning any attempt at a preamble. He wasn't there to negotiate a deal. He was there to ask for forgiveness. "Anna, I'm sorry. Not for the questions, but for the doubt. I was blind. I am sick, like you said. Sick with fear, with control. And I almost lost the only thing that matters." He offered no promises, didn't speak of raising her salary or bonuses. The words were simple, stripped of the arrogance of someone who believes money can fix everything. They were a plea for help. Anna listened to him in silence, her gaze fixed on his, evaluating not the words, but the truth behind them. She saw the exhaustion on his face, the vulnerability he no longer tried to hide. She saw a lost father, not a multi-billionaire. As her decision hung in the humid air, Richard's phone rang. It was Beatrice. Her voice was cold, almost metallic. "Sir, just to inform you that the co-op board meeting has been scheduled for Tuesday. Mrs. Astor has put the security and employee hiring protocols on the agenda. She's using the incident at the mall against us." Richard felt his blood boil. This attack was no longer just against Anna. It was against his son, against his family. The old armor of power and assertiveness returned, but this time in service of something different. He looked at Anna, the decision forming on his face. "Beatrice, you're fired!" There was a shocked silence on the other end. "Sir, I don't think I heard you correctly. My stock options and profit-sharing contracts..." He cut her off. "My lawyers will be in touch to arrange your severance package. You leaked information, acted without my authorization, and above all, you don't understand what my real assets are. Goodbye." He hung up the phone and put it in his pocket. The gesture was decisive. He was finally choosing his side. He turned back to Anna, the noise of the bus terminal now seeming distant. "I'm going to face this meeting, and I'm not going alone. I want you to come with me. But first, I'm making a call." He dialed another number, that of a public school educational psychologist whom Leo's speech therapist had recommended, an expert in accessibility and sensory respect. He invited her to the board meeting, offering to pay for her time so she could speak it with the authority of science and law about what his son needed. It was a strategic move, but born of a new understanding. He was no longer just protecting his son. He was fighting for his right to exist in the world with all his particularities. He looked at Anna, the plea for forgiveness now transformed into an invitation for an alliance. "Will you help me fight this battle?" he asked. Anna looked at the man before her, a man who had just burned bridges with his past to build a new one with her. She took a piece of cornbread cake, wrapped it in a napkin, and handed it to him. "Let's go home, Richard. Leo is waiting." Tuesday arrived heavy with a thick humidity, the New York sky low and gray, heralding a summer thunderstorm. The co-op board meeting was scheduled for late afternoon in the building's party room, an opulent space with crystal chandeliers and velvet chairs, an ironic setting for what promised to be an inquisition. Richard felt a nervousness he hadn't experienced since his first major presentation to investors years ago, when all his capital was on the line. But this time, what was at stake was infinitely more valuable. He and Anna went down in the elevator together, accompanied by Dr. Helena, the educational psychologist, a woman with a steady gaze and a gentle voice. Anna wore a simple blouse and dark pants, but her posture radiated a calm that served as an anchor for Richard. He, in turn, had ditched the suit and tie, opting for a linen shirt, a subtle gesture to lessen the distance between the billionaire and his neighbors. As they entered the room, they were met with a hostile silence. Mrs. Astor presided over the table, surrounded by other residents whose faces displayed a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. Mrs. Astor opened the session with a flowery speech about the importance of maintaining the building's high standards, speaking of security, protocols, and the need to protect everyone's property value. She described the mall episode dramatically and distortedly, painting Anna as an unprepared employee and Leo as a problem child, whose meltdowns jeopardized the tranquility of the environment. With every word, Richard felt his anger rise, but he forced himself to remain calm, remembering Dr. Helena's advice. Don't react, respond, use facts, not emotions. When Mrs. Astor finished, a murmur of agreement rippled through the room. It was then that Richard stood up. He didn't use a confrontational tone. His voice was calm, a father's voice. He spoke about his son, about sensory hypersensitivity, about how frightening the world could be for him. And then he yielded the floor to Dr. Helena. With didactic clarity, the psychologist dismantled every veiled prejudice in Mrs. Astor's speech. She explained what a sensory meltdown was, comparing it to a short circuit in the brain. She spoke about the importance of predictability, respect for stimuli, and the work of bonding. And then she hit the nerve center, citing the Americans with Disabilities Act, speaking of the right to accessibility not only physically, but also sensorially and attitudinally. What you call a meltdown that disturbs the tranquility, Dr. Helena said, looking directly at Mrs. Astor, the law calls the right of a child with specific needs to be accommodated and not judged. The issue here isn't about the caregiver's hiring protocols, but about this building's protocols of humanity. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with shame. Some residents looked down, others glanced at each other, uncomfortable. The narrative of the gossiping neighbor had been replaced by the force of law and science. Richard then took the floor again, and his tone shifted. He went from father to owner, the largest single investor in that building. He formally proposed the creation of a fund, with a substantial initial donation from his own pocket, to implement an awareness and training program for all staff and residents on neurodiversity, in addition to creating quiet spaces in the common areas. The board, shamed and cowed by the prospect of a lawsuit, approved the proposal unanimously. As they left the meeting, the storm finally broke, a heavy rain washing over the asphalt and the air. Richard felt as if an internal storm had also passed. He had used his power and wealth not to isolate himself, but to open a path for his son in the world. He looked at Anna, who walked beside him under the same umbrella. The gratitude he felt was immense. That night, something shifted in the dynamic between them. The employer-employee relationship was dissolving, giving way to a partnership, a complicity forged in battle. He watched her in the kitchen, preparing a chamomile tea for Leo, and for the first time allowed himself to notice the gentle curve of her neck, the light in her eyes when she smiled at the boy. A new feeling, warm and frightening, began to bloom in his chest, a high-risk emotional investment that, for the first time, he was willing to make. The weeks following the board meeting brought an unprecedented peace to the apartment. The air, once thin with tension, was now thick with a hard-won normality. The changes in the building were subtle but significant. A neighbor who once averted his gaze in the elevator now offered a shy hello. The board approved the installation of quiet area signs near the playground, small victories that expanded Leo's safe territory beyond their front door. The period, stretching from late November to early December, was marked by New York's soundscape. Summer thunderstorms giving way to a humid heat rising from the asphalt, and the gradual appearance of Christmas lights on the balconies of neighboring buildings, twinkling like artificial stars in the city night. Inside the apartment, the rhythm was dictated by Leo's progress. The 4 weeks of the home-based evaluation plan became the central axis of their lives. Richard, now free from Beatrice's influence, completely reorganized his schedule. He declined invitations to investment forums in London and Zurich, delegated meetings, and began working predominantly from home, transforming his luxurious office into a command center for the most important operation of his life. The complicity between him and Anna deepened, woven into the small daily rituals. There was a silent communication between them, a glance that was enough to decide who would calm Leo during a loud clap of thunder, an exchange of smiles when the boy managed to stack 3 wooden blocks for the first time. Richard found himself fascinated not only by her interaction with Leo, but by her. He watched the way she hummed absently while watering the plants on the balcony, the way her face lit up when talking to her little niece on the phone, the seriousness with which she read the child psychology books he had bought, underlining passages with a pencil. He felt an attraction that both scared and enchanted him. It was a feeling he thought he had buried, along with the memories of his wife, a door he had locked and thrown away the key. But Anna, without even trying, seemed to have found the lock. One afternoon, while they were organizing the playroom together, their hands accidentally touched as they both reached for the same felt doll. It was a brief, electric touch. They both pulled back, a blush rising on Anna's face, while Richard felt his heart race like a trader in the final minute of the closing bell. The moment passed, but the awareness of this new energy between them lingered, vibrating in the air. The tension was no longer one of conflict, but of an unspoken possibility, of something new and fragile being born. They knew that any false move could shatter the delicate ecosystem they had built around Leo. So they danced around this feeling, in a ballet of hesitation and restrained desire, prioritizing the boy's stability above all else. The culmination of that phase of achievements came in the penultimate week of the evaluation, just before Christmas. Anna had the idea of inviting the guitarist they had met in Greenwich Village for a small performance in the building's courtyard, an event organized under the new community rules. Only a few neighbors and Leo's therapy team were present. Sitting on a blanket on the grass, wearing his protective headphones, Leo was mesmerized by the sound of the instrument. And then, during a song he already knew, he turned, looked at Anna and Richard, who were sitting on either side of him, and said, with a clarity that made time stop, "Anna, sing." 2 words, connected, a sentence. It was a monumental achievement. Richard felt hot tears stream down his face, but this time, he didn't rush to hug his son. He had learned the lesson of patience. He waited for Anna to offer her hand to Leo, and only then, slowly, did he approach, placing his hand over theirs, forming a small circle of belonging. The price of that victory was the control of his own impulse, so as not to break the invisible thread of trust they had woven together with so much effort and so much love. The speech therapist's report arrived on a sunny morning, the day before Christmas Eve. Richard opened it on his tablet, his heart pounding with the same anxiety as someone awaiting the results of an IPO. The charts, which once represented the only language he valued, now told the story of a miracle. Leo's tolerance for noise had increased by 400%. His sustained eye contact had gone from seconds to minutes, and his vocabulary from a single syllable to over a dozen functional words. The data was irrefutable. A victory expressed in numbers that not even the most skeptical investor could question. He showed the report to Anna, and the quiet joy they shared in that moment, with Leo napping peacefully on the nearby sofa, was more valuable than any profit he had ever recorded on his balance sheets. The peace, however, was fragile. That same afternoon, the phone rang. It was an international number. The voice, polished and with a slight French accent, belonged to the director of the Swiss clinic. "Monsieur Davenport," the man said, "I have extraordinary news. We've had an unexpected cancellation. A spot for an immediate start in January is available for Leo. It is an unmissable opportunity. The chance to begin the new year with the best treatment money can buy." The proposal fell on Richard like a cold shadow. The logic of the old Richard, the man who believed in purchasable solutions and contractual guarantees, whispered in his ear. The clinic was the gold standard, a brand of excellence. The progress with Anna was undeniable. But what if it was a plateau? What if science could take Leo even further? Doubt, his most intimate enemy, returned to haunt him. He tried to rationalize, to create a plan that united both worlds. That evening, after putting Leo to bed, he called Anna to the balcony. The city glittered below them, a carpet of Christmas lights. "Anna," he began, his voice hesitant. "The clinic called. They have an opening." He saw the light in her eyes flicker. "I was thinking, maybe we could try it, just for a month. A trial. And you would come with us, of course, as a support, a consultant. We'd keep in touch by video. You could guide their team." He stopped, realizing how absurd his proposal sounded. He was, once again, trying to turn a bond into a service, affection into a remote consultancy. Anna didn't cry, didn't get angry. There was only a profound sadness in her eyes. She knew that begging or arguing would be useless if he didn't understand for himself. So instead of fighting, she revealed her own guarded truth, her greatest vulnerability. "Richard," she said, her voice low, "I need you to know something. I never told you because I was ashamed in the face of your world of degrees and qualifications." She took a deep breath. "I don't have any formal training. I hadn't read these books before I met you. What I know, I learned at home. My younger brother, the one who had polio, he is also on the autism spectrum. I learned the order of the colors by making mistakes with him. I learned to sing because it was the only thing that calmed him when he was in pain. Everything I've done for Leo, I first did out of love for my brother." Her confession, so simple and so powerful, hit Richard with the force of a revelation. All his capital, his fortune, his net worth seemed insignificant compared to the wealth of that experience, a knowledge forged in love and necessity. Touched by her honesty, he confessed the guilt that haunted him, the true motivation behind his relentless pursuit of control. "I wasn't there during my wife's pregnancy. I was closing the biggest deal of my life, accumulating more money. When she left, she said I was a great provider, but a terrible partner. I've been trying to buy control, Richard, to buy solutions, so I wouldn't have to feel the scale of my absence, of my failure." At that moment, on the balcony overlooking the city, the masks fell away. They were no longer the millionaire and the nanny. They were just a man and a woman, stripped of their armor, sharing their scars. It was then that a sound came from the bedroom. Leo was standing, leaning against the doorframe, which was already rare. With visible effort, he pushed the wheel of his chair with his hand, moving it for the first time on his own, towards them. He stopped between them, reached out his small hands, and took Richard's hand and Anna's hand. And then he voiced a single word, which sealed the fate of all of them. "Together." The word "together," spoken by Leo's small voice, had the weight of a final sentence, a verdict that ended all arguments. There, between the father confessing his guilt and the caregiver revealing her truth, the boy had made his choice. For Richard, That moment was the ultimate epiphany. He looked at their joined hands, his, Anna's, and his son's, and understood that no clinic in the world, no cutting-edge technology could replicate that connection. That was the cure. Not the cure for Leo's silence, but the cure for his own loneliness. With a clarity he hadn't felt in years, he picked up his cell phone. With Anna and Leo by his side, he called the director of the Swiss clinic. The conversation was brief and definitive. "I appreciate the opportunity," he said, his voice firm, "but we've decided to proceed with a different plan, a home-based plan." The refusal did not come without a tangible sacrifice. The next morning, he called an emergency meeting with his company's board. He announced that he was pulling out of a multi-billion-dollar merger that was about to close, a deal that would have made him even more powerful in the global financial scene. The reason, he explained, was the need to prioritize a flexible schedule to dedicate himself to a personal project of incalculable value. The market would react with bewilderment, his stock might fall, but for the first time, the value of his own happiness was soaring. With the clinic issue resolved and his professional future redefined, only one conflict remained to be solved: the nature of his relationship with Anna. The friendship, partnership, and admiration had evolved into something deeper, a feeling they both acknowledged but hesitated to name, afraid of destabilizing the harmony they had worked so hard to build. Richard knew he needed to act with the same delicacy and patience he had learned from her. Romantic justice could not be rushed. First, professional justice. He called her to his office, but this time there were no non-disclosure agreements on the desk. There was a single document, drafted with the help of an HR consultant specializing in inclusive care. The document promoted her from nanny to chief caregiver and developmental coordinator for Leo Davenport. The salary was comparable to that of a senior executive. But the most important part wasn't in the financial clauses. The contract included a full scholarship for her to pursue a degree in psychology, with all expenses paid by him, and guaranteed her full autonomy in managing Leo's routine. In collaboration with therapists, they both approved. Anna read the contract order, her eyes welling up. It wasn't the money or the status that moved her, but the recognition, the respect. It was the validation of all her intuitive knowledge, now supported by the opportunity for a formal education. She looked at him, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "I accept," she said, her voice a whisper. Richard smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face. "There's just one more clause," he said, standing up and walking over to her. "It's not in writing." He stopped just inches from her, the scent of coffee and rain that always seemed to accompany her filling the air between them. He didn't touch her, just looked into her eyes, asking for permission. "This clause," he continued, his voice low and hoarse, "gives your employer the right to invite you to watch the sunset on the balcony every day for the rest of our lives." Anna felt a tear roll down her cheek, but this time it was a tear of pure joy. She didn't need words to answer. She just nodded, and in that silent consent, he leaned in and kissed her. It was a brief, emotional kiss, with the salty taste of her tears and the promise of a future. At that moment, on the balcony where the city, for the first time, seemed to breathe with them, they understood that the miracle wasn't the cure, but the daily choice to stay, even when it hurts. And it was that choice that, finally, changed everything. The new year arrived not with the bang of fireworks, but with the serenity of a folk melody played softly on the balcony. Richard, Anna, and Leo watched the colored lights explode in the sky over Central Park. But the real spectacle was Leo's small hand tapping out the rhythm of the music on his father's arm. The apartment's transformation was a reflection of the transformation in their lives. The cold marble was now covered with colorful sensory rugs. The walls displayed Leo's drawings framed like valuable works of art, and the silence, once an abyss, was now filled with laughter, melodies, and the growing sound of a new voice discovering the world. Anna started college, diving into her books with a passion that inspired everyone. Her nights were split between Piaget's theories and the practice of calming Leo after a stimulus-filled day. Richard became her biggest supporter, reading her papers, discussing concepts, and above all, ensuring she had the time and space to study, often taking over the boys' evening routine so she could focus. Richard's fortune, once an end in itself, became a tool for change. He established a foundation funded with a significant portion of his assets, dedicated to supporting families of neurodiverse children, offering everything from free therapy to caregiver training, based on the model of affection and bonding he had learned at home. The project was led by a team of specialists, but the lead advisor, whose practical knowledge guided every decision, was Anna, his former assistant, Beatrice, and the neighbor, Mrs. Astor, became ghosts of a distant past. The former, after a failed attempt to tarnish Richard's reputation in the market, disappeared from the corporate circle. The latter, after the implementation of the awareness program in the co-op, found herself isolated in her own intolerance, eventually moving to a building that, in her words, had stricter standards. The world around them changed because they changed first. The journey was not a straight line of victories. There were difficult days, unexpected crises, moments of exhaustion. But the difference was that now they faced everything together. When Leo regressed and shut down into silence, Richard no longer panicked. He would pick up the guitar, even if his fingers were still clumsy, and Anna would start to hum. They learned that overcoming was not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of a safe harbor to return to. The most beautiful scene of that new life took place on a rainy autumn afternoon, almost a year after Anna's arrival. Richard was in his office, the door now always open, on a video call with Japanese investors. Leo walked into the room with the help of a special walker and held out a drawing to his father. Richard, without hesitation, excused himself from the investors, muted the call,